The wind howled like a wild animal outside, tearing through the frozen plains with a force that made even the tallest trees bend in fear. Snow swirled in thick sheets, covering the ground in white and making the world look endless and empty. Kyle, a lone human survivor, crouched inside his small wooden hut, wrapping his worn cloak tightly around his shoulders. The fire in the corner crackled weakly, struggling to push back the biting cold, but its warmth was a small comfort in a world that had long since forgotten mercy. Kale had learned the ways of this harsh land through years of solitude. He knew how to hunt through snowstorms, how to find water beneath frozen layers, how to survive when even hope seemed frozen solid. Yet tonight something felt different. The storm was heavier, colder, crueler, as if it wanted to test him, to see if he could endure one more night alone. Suddenly, through the swirling white fury, Kyle noticed a shadow moving toward his hut. At first he thought it was a trick of the snow, a mirage created by the storm. But the shadow moved with purpose, stumbling and swaying as though battling the storm itself. Kale's heart quickened. Travelers were rare in these lands, and almost all of them were desperate. He had learned to expect danger, not help, from strangers. The figure drew closer. Kale squinted through the snowflakes and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold. It was tall and thin, with strange shapes in its movement. Then, with a final gust of wind that rattled the hut, the figure reached the door. Kale could see it clearly now. It was not human. Its skin shimmered faintly, a silver blue that reflected the weak light of the storm, and its large eyes were wide with fear. Before Kale could move, the alien woman pushed open the door and stumbled inside, shivering violently. Snow fell from her shoulders in tiny white clouds. She curled herself into a ball in the middle of the hut, trembling so hard that Kale could hear the faint crackle of frost forming on her hair. Her eyes darted around, full of panic, and Kale realized she had never seen a human up close. Her fear was palpable, like electricity in the air, and it made his chest tighten. Kale took a careful step forward, keeping his hands visible. I won't hurt you," he said softly, his voice carrying over the storm. The words felt strange, almost fragile, but the fear in her eyes held him still. She froze, staring at him as if trying to decide whether he was friend or foe. Her limbs were tense, her body ready to flee, yet there was nowhere to run. Outside, the storm roared like a living beast, relentless and unforgiving. Kale noticed frost forming on her shoulders and hair. He realized how weak she was, how alone, and his instincts screamed at him to help. Without another word, he moved to the corner of the hut and began stoking the fire, letting the warmth spread slowly across the room. The alien's eyes widened at the flames, reflecting them like tiny mirrors. She seemed both terrified and mesmerized. He found a kettle and began heating water, the simple actions deliberate and calm. Slowly, carefully, Kale tried to show her that she was safe. He knew she couldn't understand his words yet, but actions spoke louder than language. He poured some water into a bowl, letting the steam curl into the air, and set it near her. Her eyes flickered toward it, hesitation battling hunger and exhaustion. The alien woman's shivering didn't stop immediately, but her body began to relax just slightly. Kyle watched her carefully. He didn't know where she had come from, why she had fled into his hut, or what dangers she had escaped. But in that moment, he felt a fierce sense of responsibility. She was a life, fragile and precious, in the middle of a frozen world that showed no mercy. Outside, the storm continued to rage, and the wind screamed like a predator circling its prey. Inside the hut, Kale and the alien woman were two very different beings, thrown together by chance, forced to survive. He wondered if she would ever trust him, ever understand that not all humans were dangerous. He didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. Tonight, they were both fighting the same enemy, the merciless cold. And tonight, survival depended not just on skill or strength, but on trust, courage, and the fragile spark of hope that could shine even in the heart of a blizzard. The storm outside did not weaken. Snow lashed against the wooden walls and the wind roared like a wild beast. Inside, the alien woman remained curled in a small ball near the fire, her silver blue skin faintly glowing in the flickering light. Every sound, every creak of the hut, every gust of wind made her flinch, as if danger lurked in every shadow. Kale watched her closely. He had faced blizzards, wild animals, and even human threats before, but this was different. This life in front of him was fragile, completely unfamiliar and terrified. He knew he had to be careful. One wrong move, one sudden gesture, and the trust he was beginning to build could shatter. He moved slowly, setting a second bowl near her. The broth was warm, simple, but it held life. He made a small gesture, pointing to the bowl, then to himself, then back to the bowl. Hunger flickered in her eyes, but fear held her still. She shook her head faintly, a whisper of distrust in her posture. Kale sighed quietly. Patience would be their only bridge tonight. Hours passed in silence. The alien woman's large eyes never left him, wide and alert, as if expecting him to strike at any moment. Kale spoke softly, telling her about the fire, the warmth, the snow outside, but she could not understand his words. Yet slowly she seemed to understand that he was not an immediate threat. She leaned slightly closer to the fire, the warmth making her shiver lessen. Kale noticed frost melting along her shoulders and hair. It was a small victory, but it meant life. He continued to move calmly, preparing more warmth, wrapping a spare blanket around her trembling form without expecting gratitude. Her eyes followed every movement, darting nervously, but the fear slowly softened into cautious observation. He tried another approach. He extended a hand, palm up, gently inviting her. She froze completely, staring at it, her chest rising and falling rapidly with uncertainty. Kale did not force it, did not press. Slowly, the alien woman lifted a hand, fingers trembling, and hovered them above his. Then, with a deep, hesitant breath, she placed her delicate hand in his. The touch was fleeting at first, then a little firmer as she realized he meant no harm. A spark of something unspoken passed between them. Trust. Fear still lingered, sharp and raw, but it shared space with curiosity. Kale felt a strange warmth, more emotional than physical. It was the fragile beginning of connection, two beings so different yet sharing this same moment of survival. Then she spoke. Her voice was soft, almost musical, and entirely foreign. Kale could not understand a word, yet her tone held desperation, questions, and fear all at once. He nodded slowly, showing understanding not through words but through presence. He was here. He was steady. He would not abandon her. The alien woman's gaze drifted toward the door for a moment. She hesitated, then shook her head and returned her eyes to him. It was clear now. She had fled something far more dangerous than snow or cold. Kale could not know what it was, but he knew it had driven her here, into his hut seeking protection. He understood her need, even without understanding the specifics. The fire continued to crackle, filling the room with warmth and a soft orange glow. Kale fetched another blanket and draped it over her shoulders, careful not to touch her too suddenly. Her body, still trembling, began to relax slightly, leaning ever so faintly toward the heat. He could feel the tension in her form lessen, a tiny victory in the battle against fear. Night passed slowly, but the storm outside could not reach the small haven of trust inside. Kale and the alien woman sat in silence, connected not by words but by shared survival. Her hand remained in his, trembling yet no longer pulling away. Kyle realized something profound in that moment. Humanity, in its quiet courage and patience, had a way of reaching even the most alien hearts. Fear could be softened, trust could be built, and connection could happen in the most unlikely of circumstances. The storm raged on, but inside the hut, two very different beings found a fragile peace, the first seed of hope planted in the middle of a frozen, merciless world. Morning light barely touched the snowy plains outside, but inside Kale's hut, warmth had started to soften the tension that filled the room the night before. The alien woman sat near the fire, her silver-blue skin faintly shimmering in the gentle glow. She no longer curled into a tight ball, though she still shivered occasionally. Her eyes, once wide with fear, now held cautious curiosity, watching Kale's every move as he tended to the fire and prepared a simple breakfast. Kale worked slowly, aware of her presence. He knew trust did not grow overnight, especially when someone had fled from unknown dangers. He chopped some frozen roots and added them to a small pot of water. The scent rose, filling the room with a warm, earthy aroma. The alien woman sniffed it, tilting her head slightly. She made a soft, musical sound, one that seemed closer to laughter than fear. Kyle smiled gently. Small victories mattered in this frozen world. He set a bowl of warm, boiled food near her, making sure it was safe and easy to reach. She hesitated, looking at him, then at the bowl. Slowly, carefully, she reached out, her hand trembling but steadier than before. She took a small piece, tasted it, and her eyes lit up with a faint glow. Relief and gratitude radiated from her. Kale watched silently, a warmth filling his chest. In this moment, words were unnecessary. After she ate, she made gestures with her hands pointing toward the door, then to Kale, then back toward herself. He understood that she wanted to communicate, to explain why she had fled into his hut. Though her language was foreign, the urgency in her movements was unmistakable. She was scared not just of the storm, but of something else, something Kale could not see yet. He nodded gently, offering calm reassurance with his body language. Then he gestured for her to come closer to the fire, showing that it was safe. Slowly she obeyed, her hand brushing his briefly as she moved. It was a fleeting touch, but it spoke volumes, a silent agreement that she trusted him enough to come near. Kale felt a small spark of hope. Hours passed in a quiet rhythm. Kale worked around the hut, repairing broken corners, stacking firewood and keeping the small flame alive. The alien woman watched him, her large eyes tracking each movement. At times she mimicked his actions, curious about his routines. He smiled softly when she did, feeling an unusual sense of companionship. It was strange, he realized, how trust could grow even between beings from entirely different worlds. Suddenly she froze and pointed outside. Her eyes widened, filled with fear and urgency. Kyle followed her gaze and realized she had seen something moving through the snow. He could not see it clearly, but he sensed the tension in her body. She spoke rapidly, her voice musical but sharp, and Kale could feel the emotion in every tone. Danger, panic, desperation. He moved closer, crouching beside her. "It's okay," he whispered, keeping his voice calm and steady. Though she could not understand his words, she felt the intent behind them. Reassurance, protection, and the promise that he would not let harm touch her. Slowly her trembling lessened, though her eyes remained wary. For the first time, Kyle noticed how delicate she truly was. Her skin glimmered in the firelight, her limbs thin but graceful, and her large eyes reflected both wonder and fear. He realized that despite her alien form, she was remarkably human in her vulnerability. The realization struck him with a strange, emotional clarity. Humanity was not only about strength, but also about compassion, courage, and the ability to care for another soul no matter how different. By midday, the storm outside had slowed slightly, though the cold remained fierce. Inside, the alien woman leaned back against a wall, her hands tucked near her chest, still watching Kyle. He offered a small smile and a nod, and she returned it, a tiny gesture of acknowledgement, trust, and connection. The first bonds between them had formed, fragile but undeniable. Kyle felt a quiet pride. In this frozen, merciless world, he had offered warmth and safety to someone who had never known either. And in return, he had begun to glimpse a spark of life and hope in her eyes, a fragile light that promised that even in the harshest storms, trust in humanity could survive and maybe even flourish. The wind outside still howled, but the storm had lessened slightly. Snow swirled in soft, ghostly sheets, and the icy plains stretched endlessly under a pale gray sky. Inside Kale's hut, warmth filled the small space, pushing back the chill that clung stubbornly to the walls. The alien woman no longer hugged herself tightly. Her trembling had slowed, and her large eyes were fixed on Kyle, filled with both fear and a cautious curiosity. Kyle stirred the fire and looked at her carefully. She made a sudden gesture, pointing outside with both hands, then to herself, and finally to the distant horizon. Her voice, soft and musical, rose in anxious tones. He could not understand the words, but the urgency was unmistakable. Something had chased her, something she feared more than the blizzard itself. Kale's chest tightened. She had run into his hut for safety, but the danger was still out there, unseen, waiting. He moved closer, keeping his hands calm and open. "It's okay," he whispered, his voice steady, carrying the warmth of assurance rather than fear. She flinched but did not retreat, watching him carefully. Kale pointed to the fire, then to himself, and finally gestured toward the door, showing her that he could help her face whatever threat lingered outside. Slowly she nodded, though her large eyes never left him, scanning for movement beyond the hut. Hours passed. The alien woman began to relax slightly, leaning closer to the warmth of the fire. Kale watched her, noticing the subtle signs of exhaustion and relief in her posture. Her shivers lessened, and she began to mimic small human gestures, folding her hands, tilting her head, even smiling faintly. But then her gaze flicked to the door again, sharp and wary. Her body tensed. Kale realized she could not rest completely. Whatever had driven her here was still out there, and she could feel its presence even through the walls. Kyle placed a hand gently on the table and pointed outside again. He could sense her fear, almost like a pulse in the air, raw and electric. Slowly she began to point again, trying to explain something beyond words. He pieced it together from her gestures. Whatever had chased her was relentless, intelligent, and dangerous. She had survived this far only by running, by trusting her instincts, and now she had nowhere else to go. He nodded firmly. Though he did not understand her species or her language, he understood one thing clearly. She needed protection, and he would give it. Cale moved to gather extra wood for the fire and stacked it carefully near the walls. He checked the door, reinforcing it as best he could. Every movement was deliberate, calm, showing her that he was a reliable presence, someone she could trust in the face of unknown danger. The alien woman watched him closely, her eyes flicking between him and the door. At one point she shivered violently and pressed a hand to her chest, letting out a soft sound of alarm. Cale knelt beside her, placing his hand gently over hers. She flinched at first, but then her fingers relaxed, allowing him to guide her attention back to the warmth and safety of the fire. By evening the storm had slowed to a whisper, but Cale knew that the danger was not gone. It lingered somewhere beyond the snow, unseen but very real. He sat near her, maintaining quiet watch, offering no words, only presence. She began to lean closer, resting a hand lightly on his arm, a silent gesture of trust and dependence. Cale felt the weight of responsibility settle over him, but he also felt a strange pride. Humanity, he realized, could be more than survival. It could be courage, compassion, and the willingness to protect even the most alien of lives. For the first time, the alien woman seemed to understand the safety he offered. Her breathing slowed, her gaze softened, and a faint warmth returned to her glowing skin. Though the threat outside remained unknown, inside the hut, a fragile sense of security had taken root. Cale realized something profound. Trust was not given lightly, but when it arrived, it was powerful. It could bridge worlds, species, and even fear itself. As the night fell, they sat together in silence, the fire crackling, a small oasis of warmth in a cold, merciless world. Whatever dangers awaited beyond the door, Cale and the alien woman had formed a bond strong enough to face them together. And for the first time, he felt that survival was not just about strength. It was about courage, understanding, and the quiet power of connection. Night had fallen completely, and the hut was filled with a tense silence broken only by the crackle of the fire. Outside, the wind had calmed, but the snow still swirled in light drifts across the frozen plains. Cale kept a careful watch, aware that the danger the alien woman had fled was still out there. Her large eyes darted nervously to every shadow, every sound, and he could feel her fear vibrating through the small room. Suddenly, a loud, sharp crack of ice hitting the roof made them both startle. The alien woman gasped and pressed herself closer to Cale, trembling. Her hand found his arm instinctively, clutching it as if seeking a lifeline. He felt a surge of protectiveness unlike anything he had known before. He could not let anything harm her, not after the trust she had begun to give him, not after everything she had survived. Cale moved toward the door, crouching low, keeping his hands visible and calm. "Stay behind me," he said softly. Though she could not understand the words, the tone carried meaning. He was steady, prepared, and she sensed it. Slowly she nodded, her trembling slightly lessened, and took a hesitant step back, keeping herself close to the fire's warmth. The sound came again, this time a low, rhythmic thud against the snow outside. Cale peered through the small window, his heart tightening. There were footprints in the snow, large and irregular, moving toward the hut. Whatever had chased her was intelligent and relentless. He could see faint glimmers of movement, sharp and fast, breaking through the white haze. The alien woman pressed herself to the floor, her eyes wide with terror, but she did not run. She trusted him. Cale's mind worked quickly. He grabbed a long wooden pole and checked the door for weak spots. The storm had weakened the structure in places, but it was still strong enough to hold, for now. He gestured to her to stay low, to keep away from the door, and she obeyed, her hands brushing briefly against his as she moved. That touch was a fragile reminder that she was alive, that she relied on him, and that he had to protect her. The thuds grew louder, closer. A shadow passed the window, large and hulking, and Cale felt the sharp spike of fear that always accompanies the unknown. Yet he did not hesitate. He stood firm, gripping the pole tightly, ready to face whatever came through that door. The alien woman's eyes followed him, and he saw something in them that made his chest ache. Trust, hope, and a fragile courage he had never expected to witness in such a short time. Then the door rattled violently. Cale planted his feet firmly and shoved with all his strength, holding it closed. The alien woman gasped, clutching his arm, and he whispered, "I won't let it touch you." His words were simple, but full of conviction. Outside, whatever was stalking her roared, a sound like ice cracking across mountains. Kyle could feel the force of it pressing against the walls. Minutes stretched like hours. Cale and the alien woman held their positions, connected by a silent bond of trust and determination. She leaned slightly against him, and he could feel her heartbeat, fast and uneven. He whispered soft, calming words, though she could not understand them. They were not meant to be heard, only felt. Slowly, her shaking lessened, and she began to meet his gaze. For the first time, fear and courage stood side by side in her expression. Finally, the pounding outside slowed. The shadow retreated, disappearing into the swirling snow. Kyle remained by the door for a long moment, chest heaving, then turned to the alien woman. She was still trembling, but relief glimmered in her eyes. She reached out and touched his arm gently. A small gesture of gratitude and acknowledgement. Kyle felt a warmth spread through him, deeper than any fire could give. Proof that humanity could inspire trust, even in the face of terrifying unknowns. As the night stretched on, the storm softened into silence. The alien woman stayed close to Cale, no longer just fearful but beginning to understand the strength and protection humans could offer. In the small hut amidst snow and cold, a bond had been forged stronger than fear, a bond of courage, care, and trust that neither storm nor predator could break. The storm outside had finally quieted, leaving only a soft whisper of wind and the pale glow of the morning sun reflecting on the snow. Inside Cale's hut, the air was warm and still, carrying the lingering smoke of the fire. The alien woman sat closer to the flames now, her trembling reduced, though her eyes remained watchful. She had survived the night, but the memory of the danger lingered, hidden behind her cautious gaze. Cale moved slowly, sitting opposite her, keeping his movements calm and deliberate. He had learned that sudden gestures might frighten her again. He brought over a small bowl of warm water, steam curling gently into the air, and gestured toward it. She tilted her head, her large eyes studying him, and slowly reached out to sip. The warmth seemed to relax her further, and for a brief moment her fear seemed to melt, replaced by curiosity. He offered a small smile, gentle and reassuring, and for the first time, she returned it, a subtle curve of her lips, delicate and fleeting. Cale felt a surge of hope. It was remarkable, he realized, how simple gestures could bridge worlds, how compassion could reach across species and differences. In that small hut, amidst snow and ice, humanity had shown its quiet power, patience, courage, and care. The alien woman began to mimic him, reaching for a small piece of bread he had set nearby. She handled it awkwardly, her alien fingers delicate and foreign, yet there was a determination in her movements. Kyle watched, silently encouraging her with his calm presence. When she finally tasted the bread, her eyes lit with appreciation, and she made a soft sound, an almost musical note of pleasure. Cale nodded gently, understanding without words. Hours passed in shared silence and simple gestures. The alien woman began to experiment with communication, pointing to objects and then to herself, trying to convey meaning. Cale followed her movements patiently, nodding when he understood and offering reassurance when he didn't. Each small interaction built a bridge between them, stronger than any language could provide. Finally, she gestured to the door, then to Cale, then toward herself, speaking rapidly in her melodic voice. Though he could not comprehend the words, he understood the message. She wanted to tell him where she had come from and what had driven her to flee. Cale listened, his expression calm, and made small gestures to encourage her to continue. Slowly, piece by piece, she used gestures and sounds to explain. Her home was distant, her people advanced, and a relentless threat had hunted her across the frozen plains. Cale's chest tightened as he realized the magnitude of what she had endured. She had fled without pause, relying only on instinct, and now she had found a small human hut and the courage to trust a stranger. He reached out gently, letting her touch his hand, and she placed hers in his. The gesture was simple yet full of emotion, gratitude, trust, and the beginning of something deeper. The alien woman leaned closer to the fire. Her shoulders no longer hunched, her eyes occasionally meeting Kyle's. They did not speak the same language. Yet they shared understanding in ways words could never capture. The warmth of the fire, the safety of the hut, the silent promise of protection. In that moment, Kale realized that humanity's strength was not only in survival, but in its ability to inspire hope and trust in others, even in the most desperate situations. As evening approached, the sun casting a soft glow across the snow, the alien woman finally rested her head lightly on Kyle's shoulder. It was a gesture of trust, fragile but powerful, and Kale felt a deep sense of connection unlike anything he had known. She had seen his courage, felt his care, and responded with openness. In return, Kale's heart swelled with the quiet pride of knowing he had made a difference, not by weapons or strength, but by patience, warmth, and humanity. The storm was gone. Outside, the frozen plains stretched endlessly, but inside the hut, something warmer and brighter had taken root. Trust, understanding, and a fragile friendship that could withstand any blizzard. Kyle and the alien woman, two beings from different worlds, had found a bond stronger than fear, a bond that promised hope in a universe often cold and unforgiving. The sun rose slowly over the frozen plains, casting a soft golden glow across the untouched snow. The storm was gone, leaving only quiet winds and sparkling frost. Inside Kyle's hut, the fire still burned gently, and the alien woman sat near it, her eyes calm and focused. The terror of the blizzard and the threat that had chased her the night before seemed almost like a distant memory, replaced now by a cautious peace. Kale moved around the small space, gathering firewood and preparing a warm meal. The alien woman watched him quietly, no longer with fear but with curiosity and trust. She mimicked some of his movements, gently placing small logs into the fire. Her hands, delicate and graceful, worked carefully, and Kale smiled softly at the small gesture. This simple act of cooperation, mundane in any other context, now felt profound. Two different worlds, two different beings, creating warmth together in a cold and harsh universe. After a while, she spoke softly, her melodic voice still foreign, but filled with a strange, hopeful tone. Kale didn't understand the words, but he could feel the meaning behind them. She was expressing gratitude, relief, and perhaps even a hint of something deeper, a connection forged in trust, courage, and the simple act of being there for one another. He nodded gently, placing a hand over hers. She did not pull away. Instead, she held it firmly, as if acknowledging everything they had shared and survived together. Kyle realized in that quiet moment how fragile life was and how strong trust could be. Humanity, he thought, had a strange, quiet power, the ability to inspire hope and courage in others, even in creatures so alien that they had never known warmth or care. And she had taught him something too, that survival was not only about enduring the cold or fighting danger, but about opening your heart, even when fear and uncertainty pressed around you like a blizzard. As the morning light spilled into the hut, the alien woman rose slowly. She moved toward the door, her silver blue skin glowing faintly in the pale sunlight. Kale followed, standing quietly behind her, his hand still close in case she needed reassurance. She paused at the threshold, turning her large, expressive eyes toward him. In that gaze, Kyle saw 1,000 emotions: gratitude, trust, courage, and perhaps a hint of sadness. She had to leave, to return to her world, but the bond between them would remain. She raised a hand to her chest, a gesture that Kyle instinctively understood. "Thank you. For everything." He placed a hand over his own heart, nodding gently. Words were unnecessary now. Their connection had transcended language. She gave him one last small smile and stepped into the snow, her figure glowing faintly as she moved across the frozen plains. Kale watched her go, the wind tugging lightly at her form until she became a tiny speck on the horizon. The hut felt emptier without her, but Kale did not feel sadness alone. He felt hope. Hope that in a vast and often indifferent universe, humans could inspire trust, offer protection, and touch even the most alien lives. He realized that bravery was not just facing danger with weapons or skill, but with patience, compassion, and the courage to care when it mattered most. Kale returned to the fire, tending it carefully. The snow outside sparkled under the morning sun, peaceful now yet holding countless unknown dangers. But inside the hut a lesson remained. Humanity's strength was more than survival. It was the ability to reach out, to connect, and to protect. And somewhere out there on the endless frozen plains, the alien woman carried a piece of that strength with her, just as Kale carried a piece of her wonder and trust within his heart. In that quiet, sunlit hut, Kyle understood something profound. The universe might be vast, cold, and